All right, peace and much love. Zin Uru here. Welcome to the latest installment of Message from the Minista. This week's message from the Minista is titled, God's Timing. God's Timing. I want to welcome y'all here across all what? Time and space. We are all gathered here together in spirit in this place. And wow, what a subject tonight is. This is more of a philosophical subject, and each week, really is, a lot of it is in the philosophical realm. These are philosophies that work, life philosophies that work, and insights that work in our day-to-day living. And so this week's message from the Minista, I knew last week already that it was going to be God's timing. And so just really getting deeper into what our understanding of God's timing is in our lives. And when we say every week there's no such thing as time and space, that's only in spirit really. And only in spirit, because spirit understands or understands time in a different way. Spirit is outside of time, okay? And then spirit can look inside of time as it's all happening at once, the wholeness happening at once. So spirit can look into our so-called past, our so-called future, our so-called present, and can look all over in this thing that's called time. And so it's very interesting because as spirit beings experience time in a very fractal manner in this three-dimensional place, time, we understand time in so many different ways, and we could take it to what we would call the in the physical realm, we would call the micro or the macrocosmic, where we can tell time by the movement of the stars and the planets and the sun and the moon. The heavenly bodies, we can tell the movement of time by watching the movement of the stars around us, watching the sun and moon move around us here on the earth plane. And so it's very important to understand, just on a side note, that all astrology is, and astronomy even, the movement of the planets is geocentric. It's based on their movement in accordance of where we are on Earth and the way that they move around the Earth, okay? And so the heavens have always been seen, what we call the heavens, have always been seen as the ultimate timekeeper. And so, ancient civilizations like the Mayans, for example, they used to use the stars and the sound coming from the stars, literally the sound coming from the stars, so that they could measure out time. And those who are familiar with the Mayan calendars, the Zolkin and the others, you realize that their concepts of time was far superior and far more vast than what we have here on Earth today, in this modern colonized system. And so when we look at that macrocosm of time, keep in mind, okay, this is where it gets really interesting, because I just said that the Mayans used to measure the sounds, the frequencies, okay, coming from the stars and from the planets, as well as their movements in accordance with one another. And so when we start thinking, well, what would they mean? What do you mean by measuring sound? What does that have to do with time? Well, time at its very essence originated from the original sound. When the original sound went forward, time had to exist for the mind to exist. Because a frequency vibration, like in the beginning was the Word, and the Word, that frequency vibration, it's a sound vibration, and sound travels in waves. That's why it's called frequency. And the different frequencies is how often or how frequent those waves are measured. And so for a longer frequency, we'd have like a woo. And for a higher frequency, we'd have like woo, like that, okay? So it's not just one frequency going on, there's many frequencies. The original word, the Word of God, wasn't just whoom or ween, it was whoom, it was a song, It is a song, still is a song. So the reason I bring this up and the reason that it's very interesting to talk about this is because we realize that time is a rhythm. There's a certain rhythm to time. Musicians actually call it timing. And, as MCs and as hip-hoppers, timing is really the ultimate style, So we look at the greats like Grandmaster Melly Mel or Grandmaster Cavs like the Originators or a Busy Bee. We go way back, to the original pioneers who were really developing what would become all these different rhyme styles and different rhyme patterns that are still used today. Kool Moe Dee, Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, KRS-One, Slick Rick, these original pioneers going back. It's their rhythmic speech. See, their timing is see, time moves. Time is palpable like that. It's palpable. There's a rhythm and a movement to time. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. God is speaking forward. This magnificent word, this frequency vibration, the sound vibration, that is God's timing. And I believe that when we get rid of the colonizer's clock, the 666 clock, 60 seconds, 60 minutes, that clock, that mark of the beast, that version of the mark, that our brains will syncopate back more naturally into the rhythm of God's timing. Now, I don't know how far, if we go back and look at our ancestors before the colonizer's calendar or before the colonizer's watch or, the times and seconds and minutes and months and days and years and the 7-day week. That's not right. There is no such thing as a 7-day week. It's a figment of imagination. These different months, January, February, March, those aren't real. They're figments of imagination. They're make-believe. They don't really exist anywhere. But there are seasons. We know the seasons. We know the circle of the sun. And the colonizer bases its movements roughly, inaccurately, I might add, on the movements of the sun and the moon. And that's it. Ancient calendars. Oh, wow. Want to talk about the colonizer? What's the first thing the colonizer gets rid of? It gets rid of the indigenous calendar. Why? Because calendars control consciousness. The calendar, when it comes to collective consciousness, because they're telling us what day and what time it really is. But is it really the day and the time that they say it is? Just because they say it is? And it's this unquestionable thing. We don't even question what is the calendar that we're reading. Why do they measure time in this way? Well, it's to keep us syncopated into their rhythm and not God's rhythm. But here's where it's great. Here's where the truth lies. God's rhythm is superior. So while they're trying to syncopate our rhythm with their rhythm, God's rhythm supersedes whatever they're trying to do. So as soon as we tap into God's rhythm and God's timing in our life, their clock, their calendar, no longer uses us. We can actually use their clock and their calendar to our advantage. Okay? This is a lesson I learned from the teacher about learning to use the calendar to our advantage. Let's use our Temple of Hip Hop calendar here. This is a time traveling machine, okay? And we can flip through these pages here on this time traveling machine, and we can look into the future on this time traveling machine. And we could plot a course to say August 20th, which is the teacher's birthday. We could create a route. We can create a vision of where we want to be and what we want to be doing on August 20th, right? And then we can hip hop through these little boxes of time to August 20th and do what we want to do. That's why it's a time traveling device. It's a tool. And our ability to time travel, we can see the future using the calendar. Now, if you really want to get savvy with it, get into the other calendars, the Mayan calendar specifically. When I research calendars, I don't find anybody's calendars even comparable to the Mayans. With all due respect to those other civilizations, the Mayans just had it on lock. And if you want to really study it, Ian Zell Lungold, the Mayan calendar comes north was a great documentary back around 2012. He actually explained he went and lived with the Mayans for many years and was told it's okay for him to go and put this knowledge out to an American, or United States audience and to a larger audience in the world. Because the whole 2012 of the Mayans was being completely fabricated and ridiculously overrated and lied about, because there was actually real events happening. Okay, and so and real events did happen. I experienced them because I had the knowledge of Ian Zell Lungold back in 2010, 2011. So while the Zolkeen was coming to its completion back in October of 2011, and then the bigger calendar, the Baktun, and there's another calendar, I forget the name, slips me, was coming to completion there on 2012 as well. Really see the movements of the stars and the sounds and what consciousness actually is. And that's why I wanted to bring up the calendar, because those who control the calendar control the consciousness. Those who control the calendar control consciousness. And it's very interesting because that's why the colonizer got rid of all the indigenous timekeepers, the shamans and the record keepers and the elders in that way. That's why a colonizer goes in and destroys the museums, or steals really the knowledge of the museums, and then doesn't allow that people access to their own history anymore. And so, these colonizers come in and they remove and don't let anybody use any calendar, but this calendar. Now, big up to the Temple of Hip Hop crew for creating this 2022 Temple of Hip Hop calendar. The real hip hop is over here. Big up to y'all, but this is still the Gregorian calendar. And we as hip hoppers, really our new year actually begins on on the third week in May for Hip Hop Appreciation Week. That's where our new year actually begins. And so it's very interesting because we're going to be measuring time as hip hoppers in the future a lot differently. Probably intervals of 9 and 18 will be our intervals, 9 and 18. And I've got a lot of this mapped out on my own work, but it's, this is something we just have to watch. You can actually see the movements of time and God's timing, literally reading the ages and the definitions of the gospel of hip hop. The second overstanding, the definitions, reading about the ages of hip hop. We can see God's movement and timing through the culture of hip hop, okay, in the definitions. So a calendar is very important. The way we measure time is very important when it comes to consciousness. And growing up, we used to have this thing now. Let's get down. We went from the macrocosm. Now we're coming down to the microcosm. Time like a watch, the 24-hour day. The click, 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 60 seconds and 60 minutes and 24 hours, 2 and 4 is 6, right? That's what I'm saying. It's the 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. When we were kids growing up, it's not so much like this anymore, but it used to be a big deal. The 5 o'clock news or the 6 o'clock news, and Dad had to be there to watch the 6 o'clock news or the 5 o'clock news. And so, the family would sit down back in the day, or Dad would sit down and watch the 5 o'clock news. And this is what's going on in the world, what you should know, what you knew, which is really the beginning of the predictive programming into the human consciousness on a mass psychosis level. This is the beginning of a high level of mind control that was never experienced in humanity since the dawning of humanity. We are literally living in the most advanced form of mind control. And we can flip that and also see that the actual reflection of the truth is that when we control our minds and we master our minds, we are actually in control of our minds. Just like we can use the calendar to control and look into our future and use the calendar as a time traveling device and live outside of the realm and the syncopation of the so-called colonizer. But this is where the colonizer got tricky on humanity, the 5 o'clock news. And then everybody watching this 5 o'clock news in different time zones, there's this like wave of consciousness that's moving around, and people are receiving the same information, the same advertisements, the same sounds, the same neurological signals, the same NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, boom, 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 from the so-called trusted media. And it would be that they used to say there was an old broadcaster way back in the day before my time named Walter Cronkite, who they called the most trusted voice in America. Now I didn't live back then. I don't know if he really was that trusted by those who were awake to what was going on. But, according to them and according to a lot of people and historians, like when Walter Cronkite said it, people believed it. And so as people started losing faith in the media and things like that, they would start making different forms of media. And remember, media is mind control, is there's meditation, which is their rhythmic speech, okay? The media has a certain rhythm to it. The newscaster, boop, 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 this just in, boop, 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 boop. Good evening. Welcome to the latest, tonight's news, there's a certain way the newscasters speak, a certain rhythm that they speak. And then they speak as an authority, even though they have no authority over anybody. Once again, that's the make-believe of the media, is that anything the media says has authority. Nobody gave them authority. They have no authority over anything, over life. They have no authority because first off, they lie. They know they lie, and they manipulate, and they know they manipulate, but they have no authority. God is the authority here. You are the authority. God's authority supersedes any man-made make-believe authority. God's authority is the only real authority. And by authority, I mean authorship. And by authorship, I mean God has written, the musical notes through the Word of God. So God's timing is this rhythm that's going out. We're out and about in our day-to-day lives. Let's bring it into our normal reality now that we just kind of looked at the way that consciousness works, okay? Now our consciousness now, as we tune into our God consciousness, into our Christ consciousness, into our hip-hop sight, capital H, lowercase I, lowercase p, lowercase h, lowercase o, lowercase p, hip-hop sight. The hip-hop is consciousness. When we start reinterpreting time itself, we start reinterpreting our environment itself, we can start making some amazing things happen. But in that timing and in that creation where we can create and make these amazing things happen, let's always leave room for the miracles of God's timing. See, so we might show up, as the gospel of hip-hop, it says, we're not going to read from that part tonight, but there's a part that says, in God's timing, if you show up late or early, you're always right on time. We're always right on time being in God's timing. Now, if you always show up late at work, they're going to look at you funny. If you show up too early at work, all the other employees are going to look at you funny, right? So, you got to show up to work right on time, right? If you show up too late, they're going to fire you. If you show up too early, nobody's going to like you. It's just funny how that works. But in God's timing, right, you might have to be somewhere and go, I got to be there at 5, okay? And, if I leave at 4:15, I'll be there at 5 o'clock. So getting ready, everything's going good, but then all of a sudden you bust a shoelace and then you got to retie your shoe, right? You're going, oh man, that took 2 extra minutes. I'm running a little bit late. Oh man, my car won't start. Oh man, I got to get the jumper cables, get my car jumped. Oh man, that set me back 10 minutes. I'm going to be 10 minutes late, And then all of a sudden, 10 minutes late, and then 15 minutes late because there's extra traffic where you got. But then you get there, oh God, what's going on? Why is this happening to me? And then you pass by a wreck. And you think, wow, that wreck looks like it's been there for about 10, 15 minutes, and I'm about 10, 15 minutes late. That could have been me. Okay? Now, you go to work and you got to be like, God was protecting me. I don't know where you work, but where I used to work, if I was late, they're like, why are you late? I was like, because God was protecting me. I just missed a wreck. They'd be like, well, you need to leave earlier. You need to get here on time. It's your duty to get here on time, I don't live in that world no more. I can't function in that world no more. But for those of you who do, man, more power to you. That's all I can say. More power to you. Because it was really about letting go and letting God and getting into God's timing. And really anybody, you want to be able to set your own schedule. And there's some people who are good with schedules like that. So I ain't even going to diss. Like there's some people who are really good at being right on time at 5 o'clock at this time and this day, just syncopated like that. Like that's just, and they can be natural people in that way, So, they're just in that rhythm. I just never was good at that rhythm. I'd always be just, cut down as many minutes as possible so I didn't, as many minutes at home or whatever it was. But I started seeing as that world started letting go, and I started letting go and letting God, that I would be in God's timing often. And so as I began, really this started happening, not that I didn't experience it before this, but really my journey in the beginning, when I started my journey at the Temple of Hip Hop, January of 2005. As that journey progressed and as I was integrating myself, as I was like catching the wave vibration that KRS-One, that the teaches in, he would say to me, he'd say to all of us, gentlemen, I move at a certain speed. And we used to be okay. And so he would move in a certain speed, and he would speed up and slow down. And so those of us who are used to just the syncopated rhythm of the work world, for me, it was different. I had to break out of the rhythm of the universe, the God's timing. And so, we would sleep. There was no set time to be sleeping. We would have set times for the show, but even that, when teacher's supposed to go on at 11, that's very malleable too, because, he can go and, that was the word I was looking for earlier. He could go and there's a certain amount of grace period for him to get up on stage, because they know that it's all about the timing of the MC. He feels the crowd. I'm not going to give away too many of his secrets. Let me stop there. But as an MC, you should know, like, when you go on, there's a certain timing to that. Even if you're getting pushed on stage, or even if you're getting rushed off stage, there's a certain timing. You want to be respectful to those who are paying you, or those who own the club. There's respect there. But there's a timing that happens, and I've watched it over and over, and I've experienced it myself too. But more importantly, really just experiencing it in the day-to-day living, right? And so I could think back to the timing of just like how everything came together in those early days. And it would just fascinate me how when I think I'd be running late, I'd show up right on time. When I get somewhere early, I needed to be there early. Even people's lives, started saving people's lives, right? And not figuratively, like literally. I had this happened 3 times, okay? 3 times, the same thing happened. Within about a 2-3 year period of time, this happened. 1, 2, 3, okay? The first time it happened, we was driving, and it was late. I got lost in some back roads in the country. Okay, so I went down this road, realized where I was at, realized I needed to get turned around, turned back around, come back this way. It was about 10 minutes. So I'm coming back this way, the other way, and I look, and in the ditch off the side of the road, there's lights blinking. And I could see that a car had flipped off the ditch and was hanging upside down. Now, I would have seen that driving there. So it happened literally I thought I was lost. I thought I had taken the wrong way. But God's timing is impeccable, and God's timing is perfect. And so taking this wrong turn, realizing and turning back around, in that time that gentleman had flipped over in his car and was sitting upside down in his car. And so I pulled over. I told my partner, I said, yo, go out there and, just start harking the horn and go find somebody. I'm going to go down there and check on him. I had a flashlight in the car. And so she's like, okay. So she jumped in the car and started honking the horn because it was a country road. We could see houses. And she's like, yo, help, call 911. And so I go down there, and the dude's hanging upside down in pain with blood. I mean, it was like a movie scene, right? And I could see he was hanging up in the trees. I climbed down this ditch, and he's hanging in the trees, and we're looking face to face. I was like, yo, buddy, God's with us. God is here with us right now. I just started praying on him. Like, yo, my God is with us. I know you're hurting. Just stay here with me. Listen to my voice. Help is on the way. You're going to get taken care of. And, and help arrived. And it was really rapid the way that help arrived, right? It was a very, very God force. A woman had heard the honking and called 911 when she heard somebody screaming. She said, I heard her saying, help. And so I called 911 right away. And the sheriff, like the fire department wasn't that far away. And they got there. I mean, it was quick. And of course, they took care of the guy, and he lived. But that was all God's perfect timing. And I was involved in that. A year later, that's a life saved with God's timing. This is why it's important, because your life will be saved with God's timing, and you'll save other people's lives, figuratively and possibly literally, with God's timing, being in God's timing. So a year later, coming home from seeing Batman, the first one with Christian Bale, right? Seeing the first Batman movie, and I was like, yo, was it the first one or the second one? Was it the one with the Joker? Oh man, see, I don't remember. One of those Batman movies, the first or the second Batman movie with Christian Bale in it. So coming home from the movie theater and then hitting this long stretch of road and literally seeing a guy, I mean, and it's late at night, not a lot of people around, just nothing, and just see this guy in his car just truck like this, and then the truck just started rolling over like a spiral and went down an embankment, and it just kept rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling. Once again, call 911. Boop, boop, boop. Yo, there was an accident on the road. Pulled over. I'll run out of the car. I'm like, yo, dude's like walking around in a daze. He's like, oh man. I was like, yo, I couldn't believe he got out of that car. It was like an old little Ford pickup, right? A little Ford Ranger pickup. And like, oh man, dude was like sitting there. He fell to his knees and then he couldn't move. It was wild, but once again, it was just like right there, God put me there. And a couple years later, just driving down from my folks' house on another road with trees and country style road, and there's a car flipped upside down, and the girl's like, well, it's on his side. And the girl's like sideways, and then I got to jump out and like climb up and pull her out of there. And, so that one wasn't as much. I think she would have lived if I wasn't there. But, point being is that like in God's timing, God's going to put us in situations, and God will put you in situations where like you'll be saving people's lives for real. You might just be saving somebody's life by saying the right thing at the right time, or just showing up at the right place in the right time. Okay? And when you're being held back for some reason, it's something trivial, really. And the gospel of hip hop teaches this, okay? This is something in Perform Patience as well. We just read that a few weeks back. God's timing requires patience, okay? It requires a performance of patience. And patience comes in, and patience isn't always waiting. Patience is having patience when things are coming at us fast, okay? We're being patient with it as it's coming, as life's speeding at us, as the car's flipping and rolling. There's a state of patience that comes over, and peace. Make the call, get the flashlight, run down there, get these things in order, hit the parking brake, hit the emergency signals. All these things got to come into play real quick to make that scene, make that area, draw attention to that somebody needs help. And when we're in God's timing, it really, who's it helping the most? It's us, because God's showing up for us all the time. Our ancestors, people say the ancestors are with us all the time. Your ancestors might move you. God might move you in such a way that it's unexplainable in any other way of the so-called colonized system of 9 to 5 and 60 minutes and 60 seconds and 12 months and 30 days and 7 days a week. They're little robotic tick 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 tick, where God's boom 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 bum 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 bum. So when we think of time, we want to start thinking about music and timing. We spoke about this earlier. And in timing and music, there's things like dynamics, those are dynamics. It goes Mozart was like incredible with his dynamics. African drums, the dynamics of African drums, like listen to some live African hand drums, especially for syncopating into God's rhythm, right? Those man, I sound so European right now with my drums. But the point being is that African rhythm See the dynamic rhythm in that? That's how time moves, and that's how we move through time. Sometimes we're just like boom, 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 moving through time. Then other times we're like boom, 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 boom. You know, it's a dance. It's a rhythm. See, dance, once again, dance is about timing. And it's about movement, because there's movement in time. Without movement, there would be no time. Anything moving is in time because it's frequently happening. Any movement is a sound frequency that's frequently happening, creating its own time signature. I'm just saying, you ain't getting metaphysics like this pretty much anywhere else. This is deep, though. Because we're in a system right now that is telling us it's 2022. And we're in a system right now that is lording over us all these, nuclear war now. First it was a virus, now it's a nuclear war, and then it'll be the next thing, and then on to the next thing. And I'm 48, I've lived through so many of these, this is the third or fourth time in my lifetime they're springing Russia on us. Russia, Russia, Russia. Oh, Russia's back. Oh, Russia's back. It's like, man, it's the boy who cried wolf, right? But not, because there's really no wolf. Not when you're the shepherd. Not when God is your shepherd. Not when hip-hop is watching over you. Whatever's happening in the world really has nothing to do with you. Who we are on the inside and who we decide who we're going to be, and when we rise into our victory over the streets, and when we start expressing who we are, what? That's really living. That's God's timing. That's God's life. I will say this. I want to grab some of the material tonight for reading. Impeccable. Be impeccable with your timing. Be impeccable with God's timing, because God's timing is impeccable. I was going to look at the word time, and then I realized that just the word time has 30 definitions. And that's just in the American Heritage Dictionary. And then go pull out the etymology on the word time in the Oxford English. Oh, it's its whole study in and of itself. And I was like, it's going to take a month just to study this word and really get the concepts out of it and draw the concepts out of just the etymology of the word time. But just know this, the time goes back to sound frequency. Okay? Just remember that. And when we look at the etymology and we go through all the definitions in the future, just for the sake of this discussion, time goes back to sound. Okay? Because it's rhythm and frequency. It's frequency and rhythm. That's time. So I thought instead of using the word time, we would just be impeccable, because God's timing is impeccable. So we want to be impeccable with our timing. And so I'm going to throw it up here. And let's just look at the definition of impeccable. It's very, very simple definition, really. Haven't had a definition this short in a while, so I'm actually kind of glad about that. Impeccable. I just want to draw attention to, I said a few weeks ago, this word able, this character able, sure shows up in a lot of really empowering words. To be able to do something, it's very empowering. This character able in the English translation of the Holy Bible, this guy able sure appears in a lot of words. Impeccable. Having no flaws, perfect. Is synonymous with the word perfect. We talked about God's perfection a while back. Look at that. Having no flaws, perfect. Well, what is a flaw? When we're in God's timing, what is a flaw? Okay? What would a flaw be? We'll talk about that in a minute when we look at this crystal, because, well, you know what? Let me put this down for a second. Because they say, what's the word they use? Having no flaws. And so in the world of the crystals, people will say, they'll say that this beautiful crystal A colonizer would say, oh, that crystal is, oh, it's beautiful, but it has a lot of flaws in it, right? You can see all these occlusions, all this fogginess, all these beautiful occlusions inside that crystal. Look at that world of rainbow and light. This is flawless. This is flawless perfection. It's crystalline perfection structure. This piece right here is flawless. It's even got a little, rough spot here. But this piece is flawless. This crystal is alive and vibrating at a frequency of God. This is flawless perfection. This is perfect. This right here is impeccable. We are this. You are made of the same things as this. You are a living crystal body. That's what Dr. Marcel Vogel was teaching about crystals, that we are literally living crystal beings, crystalline beings. We are crystalline structure. Now this, different than us, is always in a state of perfection. Our water in our body is in a certain state of perfection, but it can become clouded, it can become destructured. We can look at the work of Masaru Emoto, and about when he's speaking to the water and saying certain words, though certain water becomes more structured and beautiful, crystalline, and then other water, gets foggy. If you tell the water you hate it, the water crystal looks foggy and ugly. See, so this is where we want to get into our own perfection in our own crystalline water structure body. Because our thoughts become things, right? So if we're constantly thinking something positive or something holy, something righteous, something love, truth, peace, prosperity, grace, patience, when we think those type of words, we structure the thinking of our water and even our environment, and we become those things that we think of. We become that peace. We become that truth. We become that freedom. But if we're constantly thinking, hey, ugly, ugly, we become, hey, ugly, ugly. That's just the way it works. Fortunately and unfortunately. Fortunately, because this is the greatest lesson of all for those of us who are here and are having this experience. Because this is how God is teaching us about God, through this experience. Now we want to run around and judge this experience and say it should be this way, it shouldn't be that way. But that's just based on our own limited understanding. And when we're being told that, oh, this isn't perfect, this crystalline structure, this is perfection. But somebody would go, oh, it's not clear, so it's not perfect. No, that's colonizer thinking this is perfection in and of itself. Let's throw this back up here too. Because remember, we're talking about impeccable. So that crystal is impeccable. You are impeccable. But we have to become impeccable. We have to really know ourselves as that. Number 2, incapable of sin or wrongdoing. Incapable of sin or wrongdoing. That is incredible. It means from the Latin impeccabilius, in sin, not to sin. Wow. The original meaning of impeccable means not to sin. That is incredible. Incapable of sin or wrongdoing. Jesus, incapable of sin or wrongdoing. That's the story of Yeshua. That's the story of Christ. And what's the teachings of Christ? Go forward and sin ye no more. And what is sin? Selfish, inconsiderate needs. Overstepping one's boundaries. This is why it's important in God's timing. We realize that in God's timing, we end up receiving new definitions to what we thought we knew. God starts redefining, refining the definitions of our life. We start to see the world in a different way. And it doesn't matter what's going on in the outside world. Although it matters because it's made of matter. We see it for what it is. We interact with it. We certainly want to be in a harmony with God and create
something beautiful in the outside world, something worthy in the outside world, something of substance in the outside world. We want to see God in the outside world. In the earth. What I just said about the outside world, let's say in earth. We want to see our inner self in earth. We see that wall, the artist sees that wall and wants to see himself or herself and wants to paint that wall. And wants to arrive at their own perfection painting that wall. Sinless, spotless, no blame. That was a perfect mural. Look at the color, look at the way movement, look at the feeling it generates looking at that beautiful mural on the wall. A musician wants to be impeccable with his sound, impeccable with his word, impeccable with his rhyme. And my nobility, this is the state of mind that we should be in at all times. We should be impeccable with our word. We should be impeccable with our timing. We should be impeccable with our commitment to our Creator, to our God, the great event, the great oneness deity, the wholeness, our Father, our Mother. The one who is breathing and thinking us into existence at this very moment. To be in timing with that being that loves us, cares for us, created us, is teaching us. To be in love with the Word of God. To be in impeccable timing, I should say, with the Word of God. To be in God's timing is to be the miracle. Yeah, you'll experience miracles, and we experience miracles in God's timing, but we are the miracle when we are in God's timing. God is the miracle. God is the miracle worker. We become the miracle worker when we're in God's timing. Now, how do we get into God's timing? Last week we read from awareness in the H law, the fourth overstanding, the H law in the Gospel of Hip Hop. We read from awareness, and last week I remember saying, I want to read this next section, but that's for another lesson. We'll do that next week. And while I was reading it this week, I was like, man, maybe I should go to Perform Patience or, the seasons for timing. Maybe I should really get into the parts that we really talk about God's timing. But then as I was reading this section in awareness and what I'm about to read tonight, I realized that this is instruction for us to get into God's timing. This is practical instruction for us to get into God's timing. So if you're finding yourself in and out of God's timing, this is instruction tonight. This is an actual discipline and advice to help you get into God's timing in your life. Let's read. Put this up on the screen here. This is the fourth overstanding in the Gospel of Hip Hop, and you can open it up to page, oops, that's not the page I want to read. You can up to page 246 in your Gospel of Hip Hop. And we will just read the next couple pages, and you will see what I'm talking about. This is how we get into God's impeccable timing in our lives. Paragraph 60. The mind is a tool of the Spirit. You. Read that again. You might want to put that on your wall somewhere. The mind is a tool of the Spirit. You. You are infinite and eternal. Therefore, you need not fear or worry. But the flesh is finite and destructible, and instinctively manifests fear and worry through the mind as survival mechanisms for its own preservation. This is when the animal instincts of your body are controlling and leading you and your mind, as opposed to the opposite. And that, my nobility, is how the mainstream media controls people through their fear. It's the animal instincts of survival and fear. Nuclear war is on its way. The animal instinct, the base instinct, the root chakra instinct of any human is, I don't want to die by nuclear war. I'm afraid. What do I need to do to make that not happen? And then they say, listen to us, listen to us. And this is when the animal instincts of your body are controlling and leading you and your mind, as opposed to the opposite. So here, my nobility, this is how we become into our impeccable timing. The material world is a challenge for an unaware spirit. The spirit does not live here, yet in ignorance it tries to adopt an existence it is not of. The unaware spirit believes that it is separate from all forms and circumstances, when it is not. See, my nobility? They want the spirit, the actual spirit of us as humanity. They want our spirit, our animating force, our animating life, the breath of life itself within us. They want to take that spirit away from us and not have us connected with that spirit. Okay? And so they prey on our animal-based instincts. But here's the beauty of it. Here's the beauty of it. Wake up that spirit. See, it just says the unaware spirit. This is about awareness. This isn't the H law. Health, love, awareness, and wealth. So the aware spirit will know that it is not separate. It is in wholeness and oneness with all forms and circumstances. You see what I'm saying? Let's continue. Paragraph 62. The spirit that is not at peace has made a decision not to be at peace through ignorance and or denial of itself. See, peace is a decision, my nobility. Fear arises out of our own denial of being one with everything. Through your own limited interpretations of life circumstances, you have decided to create the fears and or disappointments of your life. This happens when the unaware spirit is in love with the happenings of the physical realm, as opposed to being aware of the happenings of the spiritual realm. Know this, everything is working to your advantage right now. You are receiving this message right here, right now, on God's timing at the perfect time. When the unaware spirit is in love with the flesh, it transfers the essence of its being into the flesh, eventually forgetting its alternative true existence as a spark of the divine. It actually believes it is the physical body and thus values material reality over spiritual reality, and this can be said to be a form of unconsciousness. Look at this word, as a spark of the divine. We are a star in a jar. We are the sound of God vibrating a light sound frequency into our water body. We are made of water. We are the star in the liquid jar that we call a body. And we are that light. We are that spirit inhabiting this water body. Such a belief arises out of continuously focusing one's conscious attention upon the past and or the future, as well as upon separate and individual things, as opposed to realizing, now here you go, my nobility, that all is one and all is now. See, we can see that we have all these fears and these belief systems because we don't realize we are connected to everything that is happening. And we want to disconnect it from it because there's a lot of craziness happening. But when we connect into it, the fear is gone and then we influence it. When we're connected into it, we see our connection to it. It's like this. You can be afraid of being connected to it. You're always going to be connected to it. We're always connected to the all, the everything that is. There is no disconnection. That's the lie. There's no disconnecting from the all that is. You are the all that is. You are part of all that is. So might as well break free of the illusion that you are separate from anything and embrace the undeniable truth that you always were, always will be, and always are part of it all. All of it I am. Check this out too. And see, remember, this is about getting our timing correct. So if you want to get in God's timing, you got to stop this right here. Stop constantly focusing upon the past. Wait, check this out. Constantly focusing upon the past causes guilt, depression, and judgment. See that? If you feel yourself feeling guilty, depressed, or judging things or events, are you focusing on the past right now? Because constantly focusing upon the past causes guilt, depression, and judgment, and we've all experienced that. Likewise, constantly focusing upon the future causes overindulgence, worry, and anxiety. Both cause stress. Live now, love now, be here now. The everlasting now. Prince has a great song called The Everlasting Now. The past is with you now, and your future is with you now, and all is one reality now. We are all here together in this time and space, my nobility. When Hippopas ceased submitting to the cravings, disappointments, and fears of the flesh, Hippopas will become courageous in the face of all physical threats and unpleasant circumstances. I see this is God's timing, because once you get out of the fear and you get into God's timing, you become courageous because God's going to put you in the face of actual physical threats and unpleasant circumstances. It's really not fun coming up on somebody bleeding to death, hanging upside down in a tree, and you've got to be there hoping that you're the one who can help save this man's life, but really knowing and surrendering that it is only God who is saving this man's life. You feel me? But you got to become courageous to know that God is going to put you in some uncomfortable circumstances when you are in God's timing. And if you run from Him, you'll run back into the world's timing. So know that, my nobility. Being in God's timing, I was smiling and having a reminiscing time about it, but know this, it's serious. When it's happening and you're in God's timing and God is putting you in circumstances and events that you didn't think you would be in because God needs you there to fulfill God's purpose, well, you need courage, okay? You will need that courage to face those fears. When the attuned Hippopa realizes that God is the true force behind all people, places, things, and circumstances, then that Hippopa approaches life as its master, not as its slave. And that's how I knew. I knew to tell that man, hey, you're going to be okay. We're going to get through this. Stay with me. God is with us. God is protecting you. There's light all around you. There's angels holding you right now. Why? Because I already knew this. I already knew this. Okay? That when the attuned Hippopa realizes that God is the true force behind all people, places, things, and circumstances. See, God was the true force behind that. The people, myself, the guy hanging upside down, the place where we were at that very spot, and the circumstances that caused us both to be there at that time. Then that Hippopa approaches life as its master, not as its slave. Live now, love now, be now. You are creating the future you now, and you are actually the past you now. Your only challenge is fear. Practice facing the fears of the body. Some fears will be legitimate instincts to prevent harm to one's body or circumstances. Most fears are illusions and assumptions based upon either a lack of knowledge, awareness, or a chronic attachment to the happenings of the physical world and its temporary circumstances. In any event, it is fear that stagnates spiritual and cultural growth. And see here, my nobility, spiritual growth is God's timing. Cultural growth is God's timing. For we are not the physical body. We are the light within it. We are literally beings of consciousness or light. Fear prevents this awareness, and likewise this awareness prevents fear. Look at this, my nobility. Here's the math right here for you, for us. We are literally beings of consciousness or light. Okay, when you know you are a being of consciousness and light, and you are not the physical body, but you are the light that inhabits the physical body, you are the star in the jar. The fear will prevent you from being aware that you are the light of the body, but the awareness that we are the light of this body will prevent fear. So if you want to get over being afraid, just realize you are the light, and that you are at one with everything else you see, which is the light of eternal mind, which is God. The more we are aware of ourselves as non-material beings with the ability of mind to affect the physical world, the less fearful and disappointed we shall be. Realize this now and live free. Stop doubting and going back and forth with your spiritual development. Eliminate the contradictory dualities in your character. See, God's timing. See, one of the contradicting dualities is the world's timing or God's timing. You got to eliminate the contradicting duality of the world's timing and get into the singular power of God's timing in your character and simply choose to be the powerful spirit that you already are. You are already in God's timing, my nobility. Know that. Check this out. Be spiritually single-minded. For in spirit, what is impossible with the body is possible in the oneness of mind. Let's say that again. In spirit, what is impossible for the body is possible in the oneness of mind. For if you are to truly overcome the traps and obstacles of the physical world, you must finally decide to live as a spirit being, acknowledging the very real existence of the great oneness all around and within you. You are truly an event within a greater event. My nobility, we are truly an event within a greater event. This gospel of hip-hop is an event within a greater event. This body, I call Zin Uru, is an event within a different event. This spirit that I can't even say the name in this world, in this realm. The closest I can get is Zin Uru, you know. But this is an event. And that contradiction of the world's timing will have you experiencing the world's fears. And then the world's fears become you. Or we supersede we allow God's power, God's presence, God's timing, God's omnipotence, God's presence, God's perfection. This supersedes all the world's timing, and the sound of God walks in, and then walks in the environment. And the more of us that are vibrating at that frequency, watch this world shift. Because I already know just this one vessel right here, just this one little old me, shifts the entire consciousness of the world all the time. And just one little old you. No, there's nothing little about me or you. We are vast. We are the oneness. We are the wholeness of all that is. Within as without. As above as below. Know thyself, my nobility. That was last month was Know Thyself on the calendar. This month, the real hip hop is over here. I'll stand right underneath that. That's a true statement right now. Look at that. What's written above my head? The real hip hop is where? Over here. The real hip hop is, and you know what to say. The crowd knows how to respond. Because why? The real hip hop is over here, over here, over here, and over here. Because there are no separate times and spaces in spirit. Therefore, hip hop is everywhere. And that's when you know that you're in the promised land or you're in hip-hop. You just see hip-hop everywhere. Everywhere I go, I see hip-hop. Everywhere I go, I see hip-hop. I could go to the Republican National Convention and see hip-hop. I could go to the Democratic National Convention and see hip-hop. The most worldly places there are, I can still see hip-hop. And the influence of hip-hop everywhere. You don't think the braggadocious of, like presidents used to have before hip-hop, they used to talk different. After hip-hop, president-elects and congressmen, and they all talk hip-hop. They all get this hip-hop going. They get that hip-hop going, right? Because they're influenced by it. Especially gangster rap. You don't think that the biggest gangsters in the world, the politicians, don't listen to gangster rap? Like, yo, straight up. The real gangsters are the presidents and the senators and the mayors, and that's the real gangsters, right? Well, the real gangsters is those of us who are spiritual minded and in the trenches of this filthy world that we're dismantling and raising into the glory of God. We're the real gangsters, right? Reminds me, I was talking to a good friend this week, and it was a good reminder. I realized why people a lot of times don't share my music. because it's so in your face and it's dangerous thinking. And like, I say stuff all the time because I'm so far removed in a lot of ways of that old way that I used to think and be and afraid all the time. So I'll just say some crazy, something like, the real motherfucker been lying to you. The real motherfucker been spying. Or I say, the same motherfucker been lying to you. The same motherfucker been spying on you. The same motherfucker ain't telling the truth. The same motherfucker now is blaming you. Now I could say something like that, but that's shocking to a lot of people, right? So I was reminded this week about that, but like, yo, that shit's gangster for real. Like, you got to say shit that other people need to hear even though they don't want to hear it. Okay? And that's the duty of God's timing. God, in God's timing, you're going to be showing up and God's going to say, I need you to say something that that person needs to hear, but that person doesn't want to hear. Or that group needs to hear, but they don't want to hear. Okay? And God's going to be doing that in God's timing. Remember in Perform Patience about God, it's going to, if you're going to be, when we're going to be tools of God's going to throw us to clean up the vomit and the feces and the piss and the shit of the world. The mud, the muck, the mire. That's what God's going to have you do in God's timing. Not all the time, but at times in God's timing, you're going to have to do work that you don't want to do. You're going to have to go somewhere you don't want to go. You're going to have to say something that you may not want to say, but you are being told to say it. That's God's timing. And when you get over fear, you end up just saying it anyways. You end up just being it anyways. And you become the light of your world. And then there's all these, it's not just that, all these other little miracles and joyous things happen. Somebody buys you a meal when you need it, or you go somewhere and somebody gives you a great discount, or and that's just, or you just wake up feeling good that morning and you're at peace. Or the right person helps train you to do something that they're an expert at, and you don't got, there's all of these things, that these little miracles and these things that start coming to us in God's timing. Because we meet people that we need to meet, and people who need to meet us, and it becomes a matter of God's impeccable timing, which is rhythm, which is sound, which is music. So in closing, this piece is really interesting here. This just jumped in my hand, okay? 3 Magic Words by U.S. Anderson, the metaphysician. We've read from him. We haven't read from him for a good, I don't know, it's probably been about 7 months since I read from good old U.S. Anderson. But I'll put this up here on the screen. It's really quick. I just thought this was really good. This is in his section of faith when he's talking about faith. But this really, to me, this actually applies to God's timing in a very interesting way, okay? Because remember, in the gospel of hip-hop, it was saying we want to get out of the duality of thinking. We want to get out of that contradictory thinking that we find ourselves in. And we want to get in the wholeness and the oneness of God, right? We want to be in the oneness of God, the great event. So we have to give up that duality of thinking. To get into God's timing, we've got to get out of the world's timing, which means that our consciousness, our awareness, our mind has to see God in a different perspective. And U.S. Anderson really just hits it with the realness here. He ain't pulling no punches with this one. And this message is for those who fall into that trap of modern day fluffy, poofy, flighty, so-called spirituality. Okay? Beware of those false doctrines like that. Beware of that. Beware of those who are selling, lies as truth. Because they will pretend to be masters when they are not. But this right here, this is when you get real with your God. Power through union. And the reason that this is so important, another reason, is because union with God, the power in the union with God puts us in God's timing. No man can consistently exercise faith in all aspects of his life without the secure knowledge that God is with him every minute time of every day. Unless you are willing to give up your problems and turn them over to God, you will find that you are making very poor solutions of them indeed. For you will feel your own inadequacy at every turn in the road and will shortly be projecting more failure than success into the subconscious mind. Make your mind up right now that there isn't the slightest use trying to do anything by yourself. You just aren't big enough, and that is the plain truth of the matter. The millions of facts and circumstances beyond your ken and scope make of you a microbe on the face of the earth the moment you isolate yourself from the subconscious mind and say, I, all by myself, will do this thing. The very first apparent thing you will discover is that you don't know enough. The second is that you find yourself facing gigantic forces over which you have no control and against which you have no weapon. Defeat in every undertaking is then certain, and the only end is to be reduced to a groveling, whining, complaining, fear-ridden speck. And I see that. I see that on my Facebook every day. People who have been reduced to groveling, whining, complaining, fear-ridden specks. But join forces with the subconscious mind, and the entire universe speeds up to answer your every need. Not without cause did Jesus refer to the subconscious mind as the Father who dwelleth within me. For indeed, the wise and omnipotent Father knows of your every need before you voice it, and may effect an instantaneous manifestation in your life of whatever it is you are convinced of. The subconscious mind contains the knowledge of all ways and means and times, and you may rest your problems there with the surety that it will be answered with perfection. Do not keep examining the pot to see if the water is boiling. You don't have to double check God. Don't make up your mind that your path should lead in a certain direction and then be disturbed because you find it is leading elsewhere. Know that your every step is unerringly guided on a perfect route to your destination. Whatever you consider to be a side road is not a side road at all, but the best of all possible paths. Hold fast and faithfully to your conviction. And that's what I wanted to close on. What U.S. Anderson is saying there is a lot of this I talked about the colonizer's timing and then God's timing. But remember, there is another timing here that you have to be aware of, because you want your timing to be God's timing and God's timing to be your timing. But if you expect it your way, if you want it your way, and you want to bring your fears and your doubts and your disbeliefs and all of your things into God's timing, you will find yourself out of syncopation with God. This is part of it. If you find yourself out of syncopation with God, good. It's a great time to get back in syncopation with God. Get back into the rhythm of God. It's omnipotent rhythm. It's there for you to surrender to and become at one with. But when we want it our way, when we want it, I want it this way. This is colonized thinking. The Burger King mind, right? Have it your way today. No, but have it God's way today. How about God's way? Because God will, as U.S. Anderson was just saying, you'll feel like in God's timing, in God's vision, in God's perfection, you'll feel like, I'm not on the path. I'm not on the path. This is the wrong path. Why has God got me going this way? And all of a sudden you arrive right where you need to be, right on time, in God's timing. And and this is where God is great. You can be on God's timing and still be doubting God, because God is like, yo, I need you to be here. But once we become aware, once we surrender, this is where we become the miracle. This is where the real miracle actually is. In God's timing, in God's perfection, in God's impeccable timing. And God's impeccable timing is forever here, all around us and with us and through us. And we exist in God's perfect timing. Even being out of time with God puts us into perfection of God's timing. God wanted us to experience the world's timing, our own selfish and considerate need timing, so we would know the difference of what we are not and then know who we really are. We experience what we are not to know who we are. We experience ourselves out of God's timing so we really know who we are in God's timing. And God's timing is perfect. You're receiving this message now because it's the perfect time for you to receive it. I'm giving this message now because it's the perfect time for me to give it. But God is here with us all always in perfect perfection, impeccable timing, my nobility. Rise up to your higher self. Remember, heaven is not a place we go to. Heaven is a place we grow to. We are always growing. There's no need to rush. There's no need to feel impatient. Perform patience, but get back in God's timing. Or if you are in God's timing, stay in God's timing. It's a wonderful place to be. And there it is, my nobility. We will see you next week. Go forward in health, love, awareness, wealth, love, joy, peace, prosperity, overstanding, forgiveness, truth, freedom, and God's timing. And there it is. Hip!